When I first signed up for the Pecos conference, I was bemoaning the fact that there would be no PowerPoint presentation, because as part of the technology generation, I love my PowerPoint slides. And I was telling this to Charmaine Thompson, and in typical Charmaine fashion, she was like, "That's what's so great about the Pecos conference. You get to describe what you're talking about so the audience can imagine everything." And then she proceeded to describe a hypothetical site doing a funny little interpretive dance. And she was like, "There's a room block, an lithic scatter, and pottery shards." I was like, "Oh my, what is this?" So I will be doing an interpretive dance, but hopefully it'll be just as interesting. So I like to think of Beef Basin as my own special bit of the world where only a handful of people and cows ever visit. Being from the Northwest, it's where I learned how beautiful Utah desert can be. It's where I was first introduced and attracted to archaeology, and it's where I found my first site. Now this area is involved in a national debate between those who support the Eastern Utah Public Land Initiative and those who have petitioned President Obama to make the Greater Canyonlands a national monument. And it seems, and I should have realized this before, that there are a great deal many people interested in my special bit of the world. Beef Basin is located near the border of the Fremont and Ancestral Pueblo and cultural areas, near the border of two regions within the Ancestral Pueblo and cultural area, the Kayenta and the northern San Juan. And interestingly enough, it is on BLM land situated between National Park Service land and National Forest Service land. I believe that Beef Basin needs to be studied within this borderland context rather than as a duplicated extension of the core northern San Juan region, because this will allow for the development of its own regional strategy. For my master's thesis at BYU, I hope to improve the understanding of this borderland by studying the ceramics and linking my findings to the various site types in the basin. This presentation is a report on my previous research and my plans once I begin graduate school. And for me, Pecos is kind of like a pre-thesis proposal, especially because my chair, Dr. Allison, is here running the whole thing. So I was first introduced to the Beef Basin area by Byron Loosley in 2010, and I have returned annually as a member of the same volunteer crew ever since. Each of these trips fulfilled the first step of Alfred Kidder's blueprint for creating a regional strategy, which is reconnaissance. We wanted to get a feel for what was out there. What we found included large archaic lithic scouters that included Elko points as well as upright slabs, and most of these were located in deep sandy areas. There was scant evidence of basket maker or Pueblo I occupation, but many well-preserved sites from the Pueblo II and Pueblo III period, and it is these sites that I wish to focus my study. In an effort to get a feel for the whole area, we diverted our survey away from previously recorded sites, which were mostly right along the road. So we spent a good deal of time adventuring and scrambling around and finding less accessible, but perhaps equally and perhaps more remarkable sites. One of these was a cave that we spotted from across the canyon that we decided to go explore. And in the cave, we found rubble, a couple walls, and a lot of pack rat midden. And in the back of the cave, we saw sunlight streaming through, and so we had to poke our head through the pack rat midden, through this hole, and we saw that there was what looked like a structure back there. So we slithered our way through, some of us more easily than others, especially Byron, and we came out onto a ledge where there were two really well-preserved granaries that were inaccessible from any other way up the rock face, and these granaries still had the lintels and the doors in place. Also around this site we found a whiteware spindle whorl as well as a slate pendant that looked a lot like a guitar pick, along with the usual brownstone and ceramics and lithic scatter. And so from these reconnaissance trips we not only found really impressive sites, but we began to recognize some regional patterns. Most of the ceramics we found were Mesa Verde types. However, the architecture, specifically the kiva placement, did not mirror the typical layout of the northern San Juan region or the Pruden unit. In Beef Basin, the kiva placement seems almost random. They are upslope, downslope, northwest, east, and south of the room blocks. And we have various theories as to why the layout deviates from the standard, and I will discuss them later. So with Step 1, reconnaissance survey under my belt and some general impressions, I'm ready to implement Step 2 from Kidder's blueprint, which is selecting criteria for ranking sites chronologically, or in other words, doing intensive research to find out what is going on in the basin. I have selected ceramics as my criteria for ranking sites chronologically. Using ceramics, we may be able to attribute different site types, such as field houses, towers, compact 3 to 4 room sites, mesotop sites, and granaries to a specific period. This will be important because previous studies of Beef Basin have focused on it being occupied for a brief period of time. However, the defensive sites, such as the mesotops, the open field houses, the small villages, and towers all seem to indicate different social conditions, and some possibly of violence and danger. Through pottery analysis, we can determine if these different site types were occupied contemporaneously, or if the structure type changed over time. If the structure type changed over time, it will yield information about the changing social conditions. It is widely accepted that in the northern San Juan region, the open, relatively safe environment degenerated into raiding or warfare. This was reflected in the site types attributed to each period. Defensible locations and towers emerge in the Pueblo III area. However, this pattern doesn't seem to hold in Beef Basin. For example, in one previously recorded mesotop site that we visited this past June, we noted Mancos and Mesa Verde black on white pottery. This site, which had a kiva structure, a well-dressed stone room, and other room outlines, seemed to be the classic Beef Basin occupation of late P2 to early P3. However, about 200 meters north of this site was a classic Pruden unit on a floodplain. While the mesotop site had been in a defensive position, this was in a vulnerable one. The pottery appeared to be all Mesa Verde black on white and Pueblo III corrugated wares. It seemed that this site was occupied later than the mesotop site. This pattern was found at the Pueblo near where we had set up camp as well. The site on the terrace top seemed to be the classic P2 to P3, while this open small Pueblo down below was Pueblo III. And this pattern does not seem indicative of deteriorating social conditions. Perhaps in the Borderland, as Byron calls them, the Puebloan pioneers, entered a dangerous borderlands region where initially they had to negotiate their place in the world. A generation or two later, after the perceived threats were reduced, they felt more comfortable settling in convenient locations, near farms, pathways, and water. And an intensive study of the ceramics from each site type will yield more than just a chronology. By examining the pottery, we can find out where the people who occupied the Beef Basin area came from and who they were allied with. The morphological traits, source of clay paste, and temper can yield information about where the ceramics were produced. By comparing these traits to those of ceramics from core areas, we will be able to determine if they were locally produced or imported. We will also be able to note the variability and link the production variability to site type. Of interest is the crushed rock used to temper some of the ceramics, which is a Fremont trait, and the corrugated ware being tempered with sand, which is usually attributed to the Kayenta region and not the northern San Juan. Indeed, Jack Rudy noted intrusive sherds from the Kayenta region in his 1955 excavations, as did Gordon Baldwin in his 1945 survey of southeastern Utah. I'm particularly excited to go back and further study a polychrome ladle that we found during our explorations, as it was the only piece of polychrome that we came across. Of course, we cannot know the why of all these emerging patterns, but there are some applicable theories. One is that the people who tend to leave the established powers and resources are those on the margins who don't have any of the power and resources. Perhaps the people who lived in the borderland were from the societal fringe. It has been argued that the women from Beef Basin came from the lower class northern San Juan groups, and this would explain why the pottery is similar to the pottery from the core areas. In turn, it is argued that the men came from the Fremont or other lower class groups. This would explain the variability of the kiva placement and design, since traditionally the activities of the kiva were male activities, and the women would have little influence over its construction. So from my research, I hope to, of course, produce a relevant and informative master's thesis, and because the research is on BLM land, make a real effort to get the site forms and inventory reports submitted on the sites that we record. And in conclusion, I just think Beef Basin is a remarkable area for fieldwork. There's extraordinary preservation of the architecture, and paired with the intensive study of ceramics, I think it will produce important information about this borderland. And because of my introduction to this area of Utah and my preliminary research, I can say wholeheartedly that I'm enthusiastic to start my graduate work.